Welcome back to All Things AI. Here with me today is Dr. Gil Alterovitz, an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. He's also a former White House Presidential Innovation Fellow and the current president of the Presidential Innovation Fellows Foundation, an alumni organization for past fellows. Dr. Alterovitz is also a personal mentor to me, and I researched under him this past summer at the MIT and CEE Research Science Institute. Thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Well, great. Thanks for having me here.
I'm honored to. I really want to get started by talking about your own journey in research. You've been a part of many other researchers' journeys like myself, but I'm wondering, how did you begin your journey in research and what sparked your interest in science and engineering?
Yes, yeah, I think and what you say about a journey, I think is really well put. Really, it is a journey, right? For me, it really began, back in the day when, computers were much larger than they are now, and it was kind of hard to actually sometimes get access to computers, right? And I really fell in love with the idea that you could use them to ask new kinds of questions and look at kinds of data that for an individual person would just take years, or maybe forever to really look at, right? And with a computer, you could do it really quickly, right? And so I always like to kind of play around and really, I think through curiosity, just started naturally sort of asking questions, right? And there's only so many questions that I would have time to answer, right, in a given day. But if I pose that question to a computer, and this is back, even before, the days of AI, if you could kind of formulate a question a certain way, then you could get a computer to help you on that, right? And I really, especially appreciated how we could do that in biology. So rather than just storing information about biology, which is kind of how traditionally, a long time ago, computers would just kind of basically store information. It's really the idea that you could really experiment. You could ask new questions, try to find new insights, right? By asking and looking through that combinatoric kind of combination of possibilities. So for me, that was really something that struck a core. And going to college, I remember thinking, oh wow, I'd love to just learn how does a computer work? I mean, how does it think? How does it behave, right? And so uh, that was what I set out to do and see how you could do that and apply it to an area like biology, right? Like medicine. I've always wanted to have problems where people are on the other side in some way, whether it be patients or teams or working with students, right? And so that's really what led me, I think, to research, right? That sort of curiosity. I actually see it now in my son, who has been very curious. He likes to build things, to ask questions, and so when I think about the journey through research, I really think about asking those questions, coming up with questions, trying to find potential answers, but also new methods that would allow us to ask new kinds of questions, right? And then to quickly kind of iterate through and get feedback. And then with that, be able to refine the question, be able to build tools to ask new types of questions or variants on questions, and to go forward there. Yeah, so I think I'll stop there, but I think there's a lot of adventures that I think you can have as you take that journey, really, as you said, through research.
Exactly. I mean, I think one way to put it is like back when you were probably a child or my age, like your adventure would be like trying to explore what a computer is doing or like the inner workings of it, which I still think is fascinating right now, by the way. Because like sometimes I myself am thinking about like how do all these little wires and circuits in my computer, how does that make this like thing come together? It's really fascinating. And um I personally, at least at right now, I don't have like 100% understanding of how it works, but like I think understanding how technology works is it's a satisfying experience. So I definitely relate to what you've been through as far as that. And I think like yeah, the your I guess like idea that like you can answer so many questions, whether that be in like biology or literally any other space with like technology, even before like the advent of AI is really that's definitely true because I mean we've seen that like it's like automation people tied to AI, but I think automation is something that's always been here with us, and that's what computers are really here to do in the first place. So I definitely think like computational bio and those fields have really been revolutionized by not just AI, but everything that we've been able to do with like data analysis in the past few decades. Um, I also like, and you've been talking about this journey. I'm sure that there's been people who have meant a lot to you over that. So, who have been some of your most important mentors over the years, and how did they really influence your career?
Yeah, I think, when I think about really every kind of inflection point or actually every point in my career really has had some kind of mentor attached to it, right? When I think back, essentially the career sort of builds upon my interactions, my friendship with a number of mentors that I've had over time. And, one of the things I really think I've really appreciated was this kind of that they've given me kind of permission to really chase these and ask these big questions. Sometimes before I even felt I was ready, to just really feel that there's that openness to do that, right? And I think that's really powerful because really it's just looking in and trying to understand um, kind of what makes something work that really kind of can be a motivator and can really drive that curiosity, right? Whether it be in science, trying to understand why something is the way it is, or as you mentioned, like a device or some kind of a mechanical contraption. Kind of thinking about that is really important, right? And so, I learned that you know in working with mentors, it's really important um, to try to engage them in some way that uh, has kind of an individual sort of connection with them, right? So whether it's showing work I'm doing kind of early, whether it's asking specific questions, acting on that feedback, really building that individual relationship is really important to be able to learn about how they are thinking and how we could think together and learn from them, right? And so really that allows you to really create these sort of stretch projects, right? Where certainly there's some goals that you want to achieve that may seem almost impossible, but along the way you can achieve these other goals as well as you kind of work toward that larger goal. One of my mentors was Dr. Marco Ramoni. There's actually he actually I mean he was just a wonderful, charismatic individual. He was my PhD co-mentor along with Zach Ohane. And, I always, think about him and what he did. And, one of the things that he did a while back in his sort of in the academic world is he was able to translate complicated concepts and really convey them and translate them sometimes even to the business world, right? He created the first commercial Bayesian network package, right? And that was kind of an early form of machine learning and AI, and really was a pioneer in bioinformatics, right? And he really was a mentor that taught me not just how to do research, but how to convey that information, how to build coalitions of people working toward a common goal, right? People often think of researchers as sort of working individually, kind of in a lab, and not really seeing the outside world. And certainly, there are some of those, right? Um, but there are also some of those that where their results are never really seen, right? And don't really have a chance to influence other fields. And what I think is really special and from him, from others that I learned is that in interdisciplinary work, you really have this really possibility of influencing a wide range of subjects, right? I think there's this sort of analogy of, you can kind of like imagine that you're building something through science, whether it be, and this analogy is kind of like you've got an ocean and you're trying to make some land there, right? Trying to discover something new, right? You could have a volcano that just sort of erupts and out of nowhere you get land, right? That's sort of like an Einstein sort of approach. Out of nowhere comes, relativity and general special, all the different combinations of work that he did and that others then took on. Or you could take an existing island. Let's say you've got Hawaii and, there's a volcano there and it creates a little bit of new land, right? It extends the existing knowledge, right? And, that is certainly a possibility as well, right? There are a lot of kind of questions that don't have answers right now, right? That you can kind of look to and try to answer those questions, right?
Yeah,
Then there's also these kind of there's places where you have answers, but they're sort of unquestioned. They're assumed to be correct, right? And in some cases, those can be potentially the most dangerous, the most misleading in some ways, because there are assumptions, right? And what you can do is by looking at those, potentially sometimes find a new link or new combination. So imagine you have two islands, two volcanic islands, like two Hawaiian islands, right? And you have a lava flow that connects those islands. I think those are really fascinating projects that I often like to work with students, with collaborators, because you're connecting two islands. That means you get the benefit of being able to go to that whole other island and learn all that new knowledge that you didn't have before on your island. And that can be incredibly useful. And many times that raises it turns question or turns answers that you thought were unquestioned into new questions and new answers that kind of evolve from that. So those are some of the things that I've learned from mentors that I try to pass on to mentees and others, when I get a chance to.
for sure. I think like the idea you mentioned in the beginning with like your mentor himself having some sort of like question that's unanswered and then putting that like almost as like a responsibility, it's I don't want to say stressful, but it's a unique position to be in because like you know that whatever you're working on is really has the potential to go all the way and be impactful. And I think like that's where that ties back to like your whole concept of like extending the knowledge that we have, or like maybe even like like the analogy with like a volcano's eruption to like create something completely new. You never know what your work's gonna end up in, but I mean, I think it's really a story of perseverance. And if you are that guy that sits in a lab for 15 hours a day, then that's what it is. If you're collaborating, then that's where I guess your forte is. But I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to like what you're willing to put in. And clearly, I think you've put in a lot of work because next thing I want to cover is like your doctoral work, which was at like a Harvard MIT program. So, I mean, looking into your background, it spans across engineering and medicine. These are two, I guess, diverse fields, but they're also two fields that have so much connection, as your work has shown. So, how have you managed to like bridge these disciplines in your work? And what was maybe the best part of your PhD?
Yeah, great question. And so if we go back and to that journey, right? And if college was about kind of learning, understanding how the computer worked and how you could engineer, kind of build it and apply it, potentially, in biology and medicine, I think the graduate school is not only going in depth, but also kind of that breadth to the medicine angle, right? So, as you mentioned in this joint program, I took the medical school classes with the Harvard Medical School students, right? We were in anatomy classes and all that together. And then, that allows you to kind of see those two worlds, right? I feel like to bridge, as I said, kind of those islands, you have to almost be bilingual, right? For
Yeah.
example, know that language of engineering and math and clinical and medicine. And that's the way you can kind of tie them together, knowing the language of both, knowing the types of approaches of both, knowing what are the challenges and potential solutions in both.
Yeah, I think
So, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
no, what I was gonna say was that it always comes down to like the fundamentals. And I think like as I'm heading into college, like there's it seems kind of crazy that like people can study two completely different things like CS and for example like maybe biology, but like there's so much that you can take in like CS and apply. So I think like that's my like what I'm thinking is definitely resonating with like what you're explaining in terms of like taking medical classes, but also being like an expert and knowing the equations and things that you need.
Yeah. And in fact, it's really hard to know everything in one mind, right? And that's why, we have and it's also important to get different perspectives, right? And that's why we have, right, a number of teams often in science, right, to work together. Each one maybe having a different kind of expertise area, right? And so it gets me thinking about, many of the successful mentees and collaborators that I've had, we've had sort of this kind of synergistic, complementary skills and kind of things that we learned and worked together well with each other. There are a couple examples that come to mind. I had this student one time, Satish Marwar, who, eventually he led the MIT Media Lab work in India. But when he was working with me, we worked on a number of things around how do you combine different kinds of data? How do you represent that knowledge, right? He later went on to start Tesseract Imaging, which was became the India's largest augmented reality and extended reality company, and I guess got bought out at some point later. And so, I think it's that combination, right? He was interested in that imaging angle. I'd been looking into machine learning. We worked together on some projects together, and yeah, I just had a call with him just a few weeks ago. So I think kind of these kinds of people and projects, I think, are things that really can lead to outcomes that maybe you don't imagine, whether or not, it's direct or, it's just something that kind of indirectly you kind of are thinking in kind of different ways that potentially can lead to these interesting projects.
For sure. And throughout this discussion, we've talked some and probably in every single question about like the mentor-mentee relationship, which is like so crucial. And you've been a mentor to many students. I mean, you're involved in programs like the Research Science Institute, art, which is RSI, and like MIT Primes, and you engage students in this research. So, how did you initially get involved in these programs? And what advice would you give to like students and aspiring researchers who want to follow in your footsteps?
Right. Well, how did I get involved? Well, funny enough, it was through my mentor. So he was mentoring and some RSI students, and he came to me. The one that I mentioned before, Professor Mark Ramon, he's like, "Hey, Gil, we got this new program. There's a couple of summer students. They seem pretty bright. Want to interact with them, and maybe they can help on a project, right?" And I remember that's how I first got involved in RSI, and I was really impressed actually with the students. They were really, just I thought at first, how much could we do in the summer, right? They're only here for a few weeks, but
Yeah.
these students, did really well, and so, I kind of took a few more, and 20 years later, this is like the 20th year of having at least well, in this one program, Research Science Institute kind of students. And so, but, I think it was just, it was just sort of natural to get involved because not only I like kind of mentoring, but I feel like in some ways, and it's almost like in teaching, where you kind of learn the subject the best if you're able to explain it to someone and work and have someone else be able to sort of replicate it. That's sort of a part of science. And, if you kind of publish a paper and wait a year or two for others to replicate something, that's one way to do it. But it's really great and kind of gratifying to be able to do that right in the lab, right? And then have people then take it to the next step, all much more quickly when you have that kind of iterative approach to things. So, in terms of, my approach to kind of mentorship and so forth, I often try to essentially almost do like a mini interview of a student when they begin to try to see what it is that they like. And sometimes they don't know themselves, right? They might be like, oh, my favorite subject is this, right? But I kind of try to figure out more what is it that they like to do, on a day-to-day basis, right? Because someone might theoretically like the idea of curing, cancer, some other disease, right? But maybe they don't want to be in the wet lab with pipettes all day, right? And so I try to find that combination of kind of that larger goal, as well as something they might want to do kind of every day, at least for 6 weeks, right? And then kind of go through that, at least for that program, right? And different programs, right? If you have a PhD student, you're thinking much longer, postdoc, different kinds of time frames, and undergrads, right? But that's, I think, an important thing. And then I ask them questions about what they think they may want to do in their career, right? And so I try to set up the project and the mentorship pathway such that we're thinking not just for the next few weeks, months, year, but maybe 5, 10 years, 15 years into the future, right? And so I remember I many times would get students that they're interested in, for example, drug development, right? I remember one person I had, Anvita Gupta, was a one of the scholars who was with me, and she was just, it was, clear she was interested in this topic, and so I worked around finding work that kind of map to some of the work we were doing at that point around disordered proteins and how you could use that looking at drug resistance, right? And her project was really successful. She actually presented to the president of the United States at that
Yeah.
point at the science fair. And now she's CEO. She leads a company, this company, AI Novo Biotech, which is enabling AI-enabled therapeutics and diagnostics, right? So, I don't know for sure, which part of the pathway, ended up leading exactly to, which classes to take and so forth, right? But I remember in talking that when she and others were starting, we were thinking about like, oh, how could you get to this path, right? It's like it's kind of a series of both projects, classes, and experiences. And yeah, so it's great to see, when people are successful, they write a card back, or, I somehow hear from them, and it turns out that they're doing kind of what they plan to do. In other cases, they're doing things that are a different project, right? Or a project that leverage maybe similar methods, but are used in different ways, right? So, one example comes to mind is the student Johnny Ho, actually, who is one of the co-founders of Perplexity, right? In my lab, we worked on approaches for Bayesian multi-nets and applied that in some biological settings, right? And the company doesn't, right, focus on biological types of work, right? But we worked on machine learning kinds of approaches, and I remember him being very interested in that kind of work and being really kind of innovative in his thinking back then. So yeah, I think it's really just thinking about what are ways to enable people to have a good thoughts about science and engineering, and developing potential pathways, which they might go on, or they might, go on a different path, but it gets them thinking about what are pathways that exist sort of in this sphere of possibilities.
For sure. I mean, like I think college is a great time to discover like what you want to do and where you want to go. But like if you can do that in high school through a program like Primes or RSI, like then you're really set up to do well because when you go to college, you know exactly what opportunities you want to get yourself involved in. So I think even if you discover a fraction of like what you think you want to do, like that's going to be like hugely important like going into the future because you really do get that kickstart that you're going to need if you're a student. And so, like, we've talked a lot about like mentorship and the work that you've done. So, one final question that I want to ask is, what impact or legacy do you hope to have through your work, both like as a researcher and a mentor to the next generation?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that we can do, right? We can build a legacy through people and through translational discoveries that impact many people, as well. And so I'm thinking about that. How do you build that community of people, people that may work together, right? I talked to a number of alums in the lab, and I noticed a number of them were working, for example, on AI-driven drug development, right? Tried to introduce them or make them aware of each other, and then trying to see if there are approaches that we're doing that perhaps other labs may be able to leverage, right? So I've been thinking about that. There's one. person that I worked with and was his mentor at some point when he was kind of early in his career. Later became a faculty over at Vanderbilt University. He's now at Brown University. He was an oncologist and worked in bioinformatics. And uh, I thought about, there are different kinds of approaches that he's leveraging, right? And could we apply those potentially in other areas, right, outside of oncology, right? Are there is there work that we're doing that might apply to work that he's doing, right? And so I think there's a lot of things to like that to think about, right? Where we think about like who's better off because we built this or because we were able to discover a way to take this finding and translate it, right? I think about that. So really it's about, I think, aiming your skills at real human problems, right? And what you can bring others to work on with you together, right? So curiosity may be something that got me started, and community is what really keeps me going, right? And if you build both, I think the work will matter.
I think curiosity and community are two of the most important things, and I think your journey is a testament to that. So thank you so much for joining me today. I mean, it's a true honor to have you on the podcast.
Great. Thanks for having me. Thank you.